First of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Richard Jones, and I'm a mixture of things. I'm a biomedical engineer and a neuroscientist. I'm a professor in electrical engineering at Canterbury and professor in psychology at Canterbury, and I'm also work in the Brain Research Institute. But the main thing here I want to talk about today is a fascinating project that we're doing in collaboration with the School of Law, particularly with Robin Palmer, who's leading this project, and it's called Forensic Brainwave Analysis, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So first of all, the background to this whole project is that for a crime scene, when the police are looking for evidence, they can, if they find DNA through blood or fingerprints, whatever, then that's all they need, quite probably. But in a lot of cases, there's no evidence, no physical evidence, and so to either convict someone or to get someone taken off it from a defence perspective, what can they do? And one of the things is that the information to do with the crime is in the person's brain. But then the question is, can we get the information from out of the person's brain? And in fact, we think you can. And so you do it via a technique called this brain fingerprinting. And this has been a technique which has been developed in the United States, and it has been used in some high-profile crimes, and it's released some people who've been in jail for many years when the evidence comes out, a wee bit like the Tenapura type thing, and it's been used to prove some people guilty as well. So how does this technique work? So basically, in our EEG, our brain waves, we have these little things called event-related potentials. So if I put a stimulus in front of you, a visual stimulus or auditory or something like that, you will respond to it in your head, and we can measure that little event-related potential. But it's so small that we have to take lots of them. So the trick is that we get certain stimuli from the crime scene, and we put these in front of the subjects, and we see what sort of response we get from them. And if we get a certain response which indicates that only the perpetrator of the crime would have known about it, we get this. It's a very distinctive thing called the P300. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's 300 milliseconds effectively after the stimulus, and that will say that that person was at least had to be at the crime scene, and other people won't get the same response, and there's nothing they can do to stop it, even if they're innocent, or even if they're guilty. So that's the technique. So Professor Palmer here at University of Canterbury was quite keen on this technique when he came across it, and then he got a few of us on board, including myself, to look into this thing, because one of the problems with it is that it's all been developed and validated in the United States, but basically by essentially one person. So it sort of raises questions about how accurate the results are in the publications. So we wanted to do a validation of this technique, this brain fingerprinting. So we've got the Larry Farwell, who's the guy from the States, to come out here to train some of our students in this technique, including Robin. He's become trained in it to be able to do this particular test called brain fingerprinting. So we're now doing a stage that we're doing two studies. So one study was to do with a whole lot of law students and psychology students to see whether we could tell that there was certain evidence that they had in their brain, information that they had in their brain that we had got from interviews, and to see whether we could tell whether they had that information or not. So that was the first study, and the results from that are fairly promising, actually. We're quite pleased, but we're still holding off on that. The second study is, in a sense, even more fascinating, is that we've been taking people, ex-prisoners from Paparoa, who at the Christchurch men's prison, who have been going through, they're still on parole, they've done their time, they've done some pretty nasty crimes, actually, a lot of these, and they're at Salisbury House. So we're taking these people, and we're taking them, we get them, we transport them to the university, up into the School of Law, which has caused problems in itself, taking these people in. And so we put them through a similar sort of thing. We interview these people, we find out about their crimes, and then we figure out whether we can tell whether that person was their crime, and even some of these other criminals we show the same stimuli to them, and the idea is that they don't respond in the same way because it's not their crime. So that's where we're at, and actually, as of today, this is about the second last day of that study, so it's been quite intriguing. It's been logistically a bit of a nightmare at times, actually, with a lot of the subjects because some of them have quite a few problems, though obviously they've had drug problems or whatever. Most of them have got concentration problems, which is an issue because it's quite a long test. So that's where we're at, and we've got other people involved in New Zealand. We've talked to the police about that. The police are really quite interested in this for obvious reasons, that this could be used as a tool for getting further evidence on certain crimes. So where we're keen to go from here is that we want to do some more. We've done some preliminary studies, we're looking at the results, and we want to really go more out into the field. So we want to basically start doing some studies in the police station and crimes, and seeing if we can validate this technique more. It's going to be quite a while before it's taken up by the police, and even more so before it's taken up by the law courts. That takes quite a while. So, for example, in the United States, the polygraph lie detector has never been taken on by the courts because you can, if you know how it works, you can fail it, and also if you're a psychopath, you also don't have any trouble with that technique because you don't have the emotional response that's needed for the fingerprinting, the polygraph test in the States. But it looks as if this test has been done in the States by 200 people or so, several studies, and so far it hasn't been failed. So it's giving pretty good results, and so we're all pretty keen on it, as are the police. And so here we go. We'll go into the field, and hopefully we can do some interesting studies, and who knows, in a few years' time it might be being used by the police and even in the court. Thank you. Has anyone got any sort of immediate questions?
How likely do you think it is? How likely do you think it is that you'd be able to get this as a technique that could be used in a court of law?
Well, that's, as I was indicating, that is going to be some time. I mean, for example, with DNA, which of course is now used all right through the whole court, but that actually took several years to be taken on board and to be validated to the point that it could be used in there, and defence lawyers couldn't drum it down. So I can't put a figure on that, of course, but it is going to be several years, quite a few years, I suspect. But I think the main tool will be initially to do with the police. So, for example, the police they'll have a crime, and they'll bring there's 30 suspects. So they bring all those 30 suspects in, given this brain fingerprinting test with some things from the crime scene. And what they will be able to do is they'll be able to immediately eliminate 28 of them because they didn't have the response, so it showed that they weren't at the crime scene. So the police don't put their resources into pushing on those 28. So they focus on the other two who perhaps said, no, I don't want to do that test. I mean, we can't at this stage force them to do it, and that's fine. But it shows where the direction is. So that's how it sort of works, and I think that's where it's going to go initially.
Like the polygraph test, do you think someone could be able to cheat the system by training their brain?
That's a good question, and countermeasures are an important part of that. And as I was saying with the polygraph test, countermeasures are it's reasonably easy if you know how to do it. There have been tests with this to do with countermeasures, and I guess it hasn't been broken. But the point is that if you, for example, thought you could fool it by training your brain in some clever way, that you could do this test and give the wrong answer, get the wrong answer. This guy has said that he will give you $100,000 US. That doesn't prove it, but it gives a wee bit of Yes, yeah.
So in the brain itself, for a criminal that might enjoy certain things, say they're psychopathic, can you just explain a little bit about the difference around actually enjoying what they're seeing and then actually someone recognising what they're seeing?
I mean, this technique doesn't make that distinction. And all it's really doing is, do you have information on your brain? It's nothing more than that that's related to that crime scene that that anyone other than the perpetrator won't have on their brain, and so that the other people can't distinguish different stimuli. Which, I mean, we give them ones that are to do with the crime scene. We give them ones which are totally irrelevant, and it's only the perpetrator who will show this response. Be able to distinguish between the so-called probe of the crime scene and the irrelevant stimuli. No, we're going fine.
Any time.
Here you go. Hold on.
How likely are false positives?
Well, how likely are false positives? And the answer to that is, all we can go on is from what has been claimed in the past, that there are none. There are no false positives and there are no false negatives. So it gets them all right. But it'll break down at some stage, and there'll be certain things that, if you're drunk, if you're drugged, if you've got head injuries, maybe we don't know all that sort of thing. And there's a few other studies that we've got to look at to broaden it to that extent. But so far it looks as if the answer is 0, which is pretty cool. Okay, no more questions. We'll leave it there. Thank you.